Good morning, everyone. As you know, COVID has changed the way in which we deliver services to our WIOA Title I participants. Today's webinar will provide you with an increased awareness of how to serve individuals with disabilities in a remote service delivery environment. Following this live introduction, we will play a pre-recorded presentation and then have an interactive session. We will wrap things up with a live question and answer session, so please enter your questions in the chat box as we go along. We will now begin an icebreaker that is called Match the Celebrity with the Disability. I think we're giving everybody 2 minutes to enter your answers in the poll, and then we'll show the results. All right, thank you for your responses. I will now turn things over to Michelle Mason, who is the Disability Services Lead for the Office of Workforce Development.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Robin, for leading us into that activity. We are so glad to have so many of you join us on this morning and take part in this icebreaker. So I'll lead into the results, and the results are pretty interesting. For Jennifer Aniston, our friend from Friends, a number of you selected OCD, but the correct answer is dyslexia. Jennifer discovered that she had dyslexia by a fluke. She went through life thinking that she was not smart enough and there was something off, quote unquote. However, when she completed an eye exam in her 20s, a routine eye exam, they discovered that she had dyslexia. For our friend Chris Rock recently found out that he was diagnosed with nonverbal learning disorder. And that was also by a fluke. A few close friends told him, you know what, Chris, you might want to get checked out. Your ability to see that you are being extremely rude is off, and there may be something happening with your processing. He followed their lead, completed a battery of tests, and discovered he has a learning disability. And Justin Timberlake is diagnosed with OCD and ADHD. A good try for those responses that we received. Justin said the reason for his success leans heavily on his diagnosis and his behavior of running drills and pushing himself towards perfection. It appears to have worked. And lastly, Mr. Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise. The correct answer is dyslexia. Interesting that a number of you selected ADHD, and later in the presentation, we'll get into how there could be a correlation between the two. Just a little bit of information about Mr. Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise. He himself has admitted to being functionally literate up until his midpoint of his career, so much that he didn't work on studying his scripts. He memorized them simply from hearing versus reading them. But I will not delay, and at this point, I will hand it back over to you, Robin.
Thank you, Michelle. Now we will begin the pre-recorded presentation on disability awareness in the COVID environment.
Good morning. My name is Rosani Rios, and I am the Strategic Populations Team Manager for the Office of Workforce Development.
Good morning. I am Michelle Mason, and I am the Disability Services Lead for the Strategic Populations Team for the Office of Workforce Development.
Why are we here today conducting this training? Two main reasons. First, October is Disability Awareness Month, and we want to make sure you receive disability-related tools during this month. Secondly, and most importantly, COVID has changed the way in which we deliver services to our WIOA Title I participants. Limited social interaction has significantly impacted our day-to-day service delivery system by abruptly forcing a transition from face-to-face services to mostly remote services. The purpose of this training is to provide you with an increased awareness on how to serve individuals with disabilities in a remote service delivery environment. And now back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Rosani. Today, we will begin the presentation with an overview of disabilities. The overview will include a practical definition of disabilities, with an overview of disability types and signs of possible disabilities noticed and encountered during in-person and remote services. Next, we will address disability in workforce. In this area, we will present information on what defines a participant with a disability in workforce, how to treat a participant with a disability when providing in-person services and remote services, how to communicate with participants with disabilities when providing in-person and remote services, and lastly, how to serve participants with disabilities in person and remotely. And now, Rosani, I'll pass it back to you so you can start our overview.
Thank you, Michelle. Disability overview. The ADA, Americans with Disability Act of 1990, defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Major life activities include, but are not limited to, caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, and working.
Always keep in mind that each person with a disability is a person first. Every single type of disability exists in a range of functioning from mild to severe. Also, people with the same diagnosis may have very different symptoms. And keep in mind that each individual has a unique disability experience. Therefore, and listen carefully, we cannot anticipate his or her preferences related to disability etiquette. We cannot anticipate. We should always ask. Now, let's move on to the overview of disability types. The first type that we're going to be seeing is deafness and hearing loss. It is estimated that approximately 1 to 2% of Americans have a severe hearing impairment or are deaf. This represents approximately 3 to 5.8 million Americans. Half of all these people experience their hearing loss after the age of 64. Let's talk about blindness and vision loss. The National Health Interview Survey Provisional Report estimates that an 11% of adult Americans, or 25.2 million, reported they either have trouble seeing even when wearing glasses or contact lenses, or that they are blind or unable to see at all. The U.S. Census Bureau reports that among the population 15 years and older, 0.8% of Americans, approximately 1.8 million, reported being unable to see. The next one, intellectual disabilities. Intellectual disabilities are defined as significant limitations in both cognitive functioning and in adaptive behaviors, our ability to learn, and our ability to adapt to changes, which originates before the age of 18. It is estimated that about 7 to 8 million Americans of all ages, or 3% of the general population, experience intellectual disabilities. Learning disabilities. Individuals with learning disabilities have average or above average intelligence. Learning disabilities has nothing to do with that person's intelligence, but have difficulty learning and using skills in reading, writing, listening, speaking, reasoning, or doing math due to differences in how their brain processes information. Learning disabilities affect people of all ages, including adults. The National Center for Learning Disabilities estimates that the prevalence of learning disabilities may be closer to 4 to 6% of all Americans. The next disability type, psychiatric disabilities. Psychiatric disabilities include mental health or psychological disorders that interfere with the performance of a major life activity. They include, but are not limited to, major depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, schizophrenia, and personality disorder. Let's pause for a minute here and briefly discuss a few of these conditions that we have commonly heard about, but that might be misrepresented. The first one is OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. You might have heard that term before. Let's learn what it means. It really means a condition in which the person has a fixation with something, an irrational thought, for example, fear of germs or the need to keep everything organized and clean. And that fear, that thought repeats in the person's head over and over and over again, causing distress. Such a distress that the person has to do something about it, has to engage in a particular behavior over and over again to decrease the stress caused by the thought. For example, someone that has fear of germs, that causes for that person to wash his or her hands until the skin, over and over again, until the skin of his hands or her hands is raw. The person might or might not be aware of this behavior, and they might not know that the behavior is unhealthy, and they cannot control the behavior. Therefore, the behavior becomes compulsive, and that's how we have the obsessive compulsive disorder. It's an obsessive thought that generates a compulsive behavior, something that you cannot stop yourself from doing, and that causes damage to you and impairs a major life activity. The second condition that I wanted to talk about is autism. That's a condition that we hear over and over again. And autism is a condition that starts from birth. There's other conditions not related to autism, but that has similar traits. And oftentimes we get this confused. And I know that you have seen someone with some of these traits, maybe in your family, maybe coworkers, and more importantly, maybe participants. And if you have not seen participants with some of these traits, you will see participants with some of these traits. And we want to make sure that you are equipped and you understand what you are seeing so you can work with them in an effective manner. So, what's autism? A person with autism has the following characteristics. First of all, they have very limited social skills. They struggle understanding the common social cues. Second, they have communication problems. Their communication is either delayed, they have a hard time communicating with other people. Third, a very limited and strict list of activities and interests. These are the type of people that they have a specific routine and they follow that routine every day, and they have a very limited things that they like to do and that they like to eat, for example, and they follow that every day, and that gives them comfort, right? They makes them feel comfortable. This is a condition that you will likely see in kids, youth, and adults. And sometimes it's combined with some cognitive delay, but not all the time. You can have someone with autism that have all the characteristics that I mentioned, plus some learning problems. And then you will have individuals with autism that have the characteristics that I just mentioned, but have no cognitive problems. A cousin of autism is Asperger's syndrome. The syndrome is characterized by someone that struggles understanding the social interaction. It could be a youth, it could be an adult, and they can do everything else without problem, but they have problems understanding what individuals want to say in a social sense of that word, right? Understanding the social cues and responding to that appropriately. But they have no communication problem, they have no learning or cognitive problems. They just have problems with that particular piece of understanding social cues. In the natural way of seeing this condition, you might say that these are those people that are socially awkward. And it is important for you to recognize this and to understand that you might be serving a participant that is socially awkward, but they have no problem learning, they have no problem doing the rest of their life functionings, but that this is a difficulty that they have, the social interaction. For psychiatric disabilities, right, the type, intensity, and duration of symptoms vary depending on the individual. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, reports that approximately 25% of adults in the United States have a psychiatric disability. That's a lot of individuals. And nearly half of all Americans will develop at least one psychiatric disability during their lifetime. However, it is important to mention that this estimate includes individuals whose symptoms range anywhere from mild disruptions in daily functioning all the way up to severe personal, social, and occupational impairments. Now, it is estimated that due to the crisis created by COVID, 1 in every 3 Americans could potentially develop a psychiatric disability. And we just talked about OCD, and we talked about how individuals with OCD, one of their characteristics is that something that is common to see in this disorder is fear to germs. So you can imagine how this current environment has increased those OCD characteristics in those individuals that have OCD. Now let's move on to our next disability type, mobility disabilities. Mobility disabilities include not only wheelchair users, but also any individual who has difficulty ambulating. The U.S. Census Bureau reports that among Americans 15 and older living outside of institutions, not in nursing homes, not in hospitals, 1% or 2.7 million used a wheelchair. An additional 3% or 9.1 million used a mobility aid such as a cane, crutches, or walkers. That concludes our overview of disability. Now I will get it back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Rosani. Now that we have reviewed the types of disabilities, we will turn to signs of possible disabilities. In recognizing signs of possible disabilities, it does not oftentimes require that you have a strong background and/or training in disabilities. That includes in-person and remote services. I'll start out with in-person services. Several disabilities exhibit signs which are prominent and more apparent to recognize. For example, the use of a wheelchair, a walker, or a cane indicate the presence of a mobility disability. Likewise, a visible hearing aid and possibly the use of sign language to communicate indicates a deaf or hard of hearing disability. Distinctive facial features may also indicate evidence of a disability. Down syndrome is such a disability. However, there are disabilities which are not as noticeable to identify and are hidden until you are involved with the participant in the process of providing services. For example, difficulty reading documents and following along in sessions may indicate a learning and/or intellectual disability. An elevated level of impatience and display of anxiousness may indicate a psychiatric disability. A flat affect may indicate a psychological or psychiatric disability. As such, you may encounter a potential participant or someone in stream of receiving services that as you're engaging with them, their facial expression doesn't change. And therefore, they don't look motivated. You may also recognize a sign of a disability when an adult comes to the center accompanied by another adult to represent him or her. That may indicate a disability. Identifying signs of disabilities when providing remote services require closer observation. Signs indicating a speech and/or hearing disability are more apparent to identify in providing remote services. For example, use of a sign language interpreter during a phone call indicates you are speaking with a person who is deaf. An example of such a call is a relay interpreter stating, "Hello, this is interpreter 489 calling for Lindsay." Significantly slurred speech is an indication you are speaking with someone with a speech disability. Keep in mind, a speech disability does not mean the participant does not comprehend the content of the conversation. Hidden disabilities, while providing remote services, require even a deeper observation. For example, an inability to follow a discussion with multiple requests being made for information to be repeated or clarified during a call may indicate a learning disability. An elevated level of impatience, display of anxiousness. Their speech may seem erratic. They may appear to be angry or upset during the call. Although the behavior is undesirable, and you may be questioning, should you pause? There is the question that there is an indication of a psychiatric disability. Then you may encounter a participant who has unrealistic expectations. For example, a participant may make multiple calls to the office and send multiple emails in a short period of time, expecting a quick turnaround. This is an indication there may be a psychiatric disability. Again, these are not all of the signs that you may encounter providing in-person and remote services, but they are the high-arching signs that you may recognize, which does not require a strong disability background in training and education. Rosani, I'll pass it off to you for disability and workforce development.
Thank you, Michelle. Now, let's take all of this that we have discussed, the signs, the disability types, the definition of what a disability is, and apply it to our day-to-day work. What we do, how this works in the workforce development system. So the first area that we are going to discuss is what defines a participant with a disability in workforce. In the workforce system, unlike other systems, maybe like vocational rehab or Department of Behavioral Health, any customer who discloses a disability to a workforce staff is considered a customer with a disability. Let me say that again. For us here in workforce, any customer who discloses a disability to a workforce staff is considered a customer with a disability. In other words, self-attestation is enough to be reported as a participant with disabilities. And what is a valid self-attestation? So, a valid form of self-attestation for disability purposes is when the applicant self-discloses in the WIOA application as having a disability, and then he or she signs that application. That's all that you need as a case manager to report that individual as an individual with disabilities for our system, in our system. A properly signed application is enough for the case manager to report an individual as a person with a disability. Therefore, a participant is not obligated to provide any further proof or documentation of disability beyond a disclosure. You don't have to validate that with anything else. You don't have to ask for any other letter or documentation from a doctor to report someone as someone with a disability. Always remember, a request for accommodations is considered a self-disclosure if that request is made to address a disability. Now, back to you, Michelle.
How to treat a participant with a disability. Whether in person, over the phone, or through an online platform, remember to relax and to treat the individual with a disability like any other person, like any other participant. Do not get anxious trying to anticipate the needs or possible challenges of the individual. The participant with a disability is the expert on what he or she needs. So simply ask if they need additional assistance. Never assume you know what the individual needs. How to communicate with participants with disabilities. Whether in person, over the phone, or through an online platform, use person-first language. For example, Joyce, who is blind, or John, who is a welder who has a disability. When communicating with individuals with disabilities, whether in person or remotely, don't make any assumption that any specific action needs to be taken. If someone seems to be struggling, ask them if they want assistance. Then follow the input given by the customer.
So, how do I serve participants with disabilities in the workforce system? It does not matter if you're assisting the individuals at your center or remotely. There are 4 basic standards we all should follow. There's 4 basic standards that we want you to take with you today. The first one is treat a customer with a disability like any other registered participant. Let me say that again because it's super simple and we might forget. Treat a customer with a disability like any other registered participant. So I want you to breathe in and relax. Second, do not make limiting assumptions. We learned earlier that each disability experience is unique to the individual, so we cannot anticipate their needs. Third, listen to what the customer says will work for them. Remember, the participant is the expert. You might be the WIOA Title I services expert, but that person is the expert on what he or she needs. So listen and do what they ask you to do because they are the expert. Fourth, do not change the center's service flow without a specific request to do so. Most accommodations requests will be simple ones that would not require monetary investments or major changes. If you receive an accommodation request that will require a financial investment or it will affect the general customer service flow of your center, either in-person services or remote services, right? Check with your supervisor and or your equal employment officer. Each center should have a reasonable accommodations request process for you to follow. If your center does not have a process for accommodations request, our team will be more than glad to work with you and your center to create one. Remember, participants with disabilities should access services like everyone else does and should be treated with respect, dignity, and professionalism. And this concludes our presentation for today. If you have any questions regarding today's training, please feel free to reach out to us, Michelle Mason, the Disability Services Lead, and myself. Our contact information is presented in this slide. Thank you.
All right, we will now move to the interactive portion of today's training. Michelle and Rosani will lead you in these activities.
Thank you, Robin. This is Michelle speaking. That was quite a bit of information, and we understand it was a lot to process. And we want to give you an opportunity to process and show what you've learned through 3 fun activities that we have prepared. The first activity is a short poll of 5 questions based on your knowledge in the area of communicating with and about people with disabilities. You will have 2 minutes to submit your responses. Okay, welcome back, everyone. It looks like we may have a few disability experts in the room on the rise. The first question, Joe has a mobility problem and informed the workforce staff that he had difficulty locating parking. What can we conclude? The correct answer is Joe has a disability and needs to use an accessible space. Pardon me. I want to draw your attention just for a second to the fact that ADA requires the availability of accessible parking spots in public service delivery environments. And in this case, the flag is the participant is drawing attention to a potential concern regarding parking availability. And that's geared towards our equal employment opportunity specialists in the room. Moving on to question 2. John had a significant difficulty reading the application and it took a long time to complete. You should, and the correct answer is C. We have 100% participation on the correct answer for that. So remember, if you reflect back to the training, offering more time is not offensive and it allows the participant to make the decision to accept assistance. It is okay to ask. Question 3, you have a participant, Brittany, who is blind. How would you refer to Brittany? The correct answer is B. Brittany has a visual disability. Remember, people first language. Moving on to number 4. Although Audrey completes all assignments each time you meet with her, she never appears to be motivated regarding her training because there is no excitement in her interactions with you. Audrey's flat affect is evidence of, and the correct answer here is C. Evidence of a flat affect in her expression may be evidence of a psychological or psychiatric disability. Remember, the flat affect does not mean that she doesn't comprehend or that she is not motivated. It may be an indicator of a disability, psychiatric or psychological. 5th and final question. Carson seems to be a difficult participant to work with. He is impatient and anxious, and every time he calls the Career Center. An effective case manager would, yay! B is the correct answer. Ask Carson if he needs additional assistance because he might have a psychiatric disability. Again, allow the participant to process their needs and make the independent decision to accept assistance. The key here is to look for the signs, be flexible, and pause. Allow the participant to share if and when they need assistance. That completes activity A. We will move on to activity B. I told you they were going to be fun. They're going to pique what you've learned. And in activity B, you will guess the disability once you view 2 short videos. They'll make you laugh, and I'm sure they will stand in your memory a long time after this training. You will have a few minutes to view the videos.
If you could wake up tomorrow having gained any one quality or ability, what would it be?
Well, not to steal from the Bible, but turning water into wine sounds pretty good.
I don't think you're taking this seriously.
Come on, we're just having some fun with you.
I believe what you're doing is using humor to avoid vulnerability.
Fine. Honestly, if I could have one quality, I wish I could be as smart as you guys.
Keep dreaming.
Sheldon!
No, I'm sorry. That's me having fun with you. Look, you may not be as academically inclined as are we. Yes, that's how you say it. But you possess an intelligence I envy, which leads me to my answer. I would choose the ability to read people's minds.
Well, I can't read people's minds. Actually, that's not true. I can read men's minds, but only because it's usually the one thing.
When are we going to get robot eyes?
You're all alike.
Well, what I meant was, I often misinterpret how others are feeling. Like, I can't always tell if someone is only joking or laughing at me. You know, like if they're mad at something I've done or just in a bad mood. It's incredibly stressful.
Really? You always seem so confident.
Well, I'm not. And if I could read people's minds, life would be so much simpler.
Well, now I wish I had the ability to make that stuff easier for you.
Well, thank you.
Are you through with that?
Yeah, sorry, the swallowing slowed me down.
Whose little ball of paper is this?
Oh, that would be mine. See, I wrote a note to myself, and then I realized I didn't need the note, so I balled it up, and now I wish I was dead.
She already fluffed.
I told you that was going to be fun. Okay, and I'm sure that you will remember these videos way after this training. So the first video was Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. And you all have correctly answered Asperger's syndrome. And I'm going to call your attention to the signs presented in the training. Remember the social awkwardness, the lack of understanding social cues from those around them that they're interacting with, the lack of general social awareness. But their inability to follow social cues does not necessarily mean that the participant lacks the intellect to process the information for workforce services. And the beauty in Sheldon's case is he was speaking with a friend and provided the opportunity to give his perspective. Our participants may not be presented the gift of time to process and explain. So the key is to recognize these signs, pause, and allow yourself a level of flexibility. Second video, Monica from Friends. You will 91% OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, was the correct answer. Well done. How many Monicas do we have in our lives? Or we may be Monica to a point. It's a bit extreme, but you can see the effect of Monica's obsession with cleaning on her friends, but they work through it. Again, the same as in Sheldon's case, because they're friends, and so they want to. And our participants may not be given that opportunity. So again, the suggestion is for the service participants to recognize the signs and be flexible with the flexible as a key of service. And now I will hand it over to Rosani, who will handle our third activity.
Good morning, everybody. We are down to our last activity. This is a short one, but focuses on remote services. So I'm glad to hear that most of you got the Asperger's and the OCD correct. Yes, we're happy about that. Now let's move to remote disability services etiquette scenarios. So we have 3 scenarios here. The first one says as follows. You receive an email from someone that seems to be requesting WIOA services. The email has no content. However, the subject line reads, "I need a job. Can you call me back?" There's nothing else in that email except for that I just read in the subject line. When you receive this email, you should first ignore the email, as the email is evidence that the person is not ready for employment. 2, return the email asking for a contact number and call the person back. Or 3, ignore the email due to the lack of contact information. What should be the right answer? And a poll will come, yes. So entering the poll, what you think will be the right answer? Great, and I can see that you guys are disability awareness experts now. Yes, we will even though we didn't have a contact number, or even though when you saw that email, lots of red flags came off and you're like, what is this? What's going on? Well, it might be a clear sign that you're working with someone that has a disability and is not fully embedded in the email etiquette, right? But we give them a chance. We're flexible. We email them back because thank God we do have their email address, and then we ask for a phone number. If you never receive a response, then you don't do anything else. But if you receive a response, then you're giving that individual a chance, so that individual, if it's a good fit, can enter into our services. So the second scenario says, you receive an email from someone that seems to be requesting, no, that's the second question, I'm sorry, says, you are completing a WIOA intake over the phone. The participant self-discloses having a disability and requests for his mom or his mother to be with him during the intake process. You, as the WIOA Title I staff, should direct all your attention from that moment on to the mother of the participant, because she can provide you with the most reliable information. Option number 2, inform the participant that he is an adult, therefore having his mother participating in the intake process would be a breach of confidentiality. Or 3, acknowledge the presence of the mother and continue forward with the interview process with the participant, providing the participant the flexibility to get assistance from his mother when he considers it necessary. And actually, I'm on scenario 3 instead of 2. I'm sorry, I apologize. Okay, great. Yes, you should acknowledge the presence of the mom. And why we added this scenario here, sometimes we're working with individuals that are deaf, hard of hearing. We have an interpreter in the room, or over the Zoom platform or online platform that you're using, or sometimes we're working with youth and their parents come along. It is important for us to remember that a good disability etiquette is for always to keep your attention on the participant. You talk to the participant. If the participant needs to reach out to that person that he or she brought along to get clarity or to help them out, you give them that flexibility, but your main concern and attention and the person that you should put your efforts towards is the person that you are interviewing or you are providing services to. The other persons in the room, the other individuals that might be in the room, they are there to support the participant, but your interaction when you are, for example, talking to someone that is deaf, even though the person might be looking at the interpreter, you need to be looking at the person, at the participant, and directing your questions and your information to that particular participant, not the person helping that participant through the interview process. So now let's read scenario 2. So scenario 2 says, Joseph is hard of hearing and he complements his hearing by reading lips. You're communicating with him through a Zoom video call. We're looking down at the documents you are reviewing with him. You proceed to ask him questions. What you should do, proceed forward. What you should do when you realize that you're not looking at the camera, you should proceed forward because your behavior shows Joseph you are comfortable working with him. To start looking into the camera and repeat the information you were discussing with him before when you weren't looking into the camera. Or 3, proceed with your conversation because it is Joseph's responsibility to follow the WIOA Title I process. I think we have made this too easy for you guys. Okay, so I see that some of you responded that proceed forward because your behavior shows Joseph that you are comfortable with him, right? And you don't want to make You don't want to get into a situation that is awkward or to you or Joseph in this case, right? But actually, the right answer is that you start looking into the camera and you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Joseph. Let me repeat that," and then you move forward repeating what you just said, because even though you want to show that you're comfortable with him, but you want to acknowledge that he didn't hear what you told him, right? It's no different from when you are talking to someone on the phone, on your cell phone, and then you lose signal, and then you have to call back and say, "I'm sorry, where did we left it off? Okay, what I was telling you is this and that and that and that." You follow that kind of same rule here. You realize that you were not looking on the camera. "Oh, I was not looking into the camera." You start looking into the camera, and then you repeat what you just said to Joseph, or you ask Joseph, "Where did we left off? What was the last thing that you heard?" And then you take it from that moment on. The key is not to like get all nervous or start apologizing or just freeze, right? Just relax and ask him where we left it off. Okay, and then you start looking at the camera and asking your questions again. And that shouldn't change your interview process at all, but it gives him the chance to tell you where he was, and then you move forward. And I know that sometimes we actually don't know how to react, but if you don't know what to do, the rule is simple: ask, because Joseph or whoever you're working with is the expert on what they need and how they work best, which is what we want. So this concludes this interactive section and our interactive section for today's webinar. As a support to your learning experience, we have created additional resources for you. We have the disability etiquette tips in the COVID environment. Is a one pager that you can print out and have with you wherever you're working. We have that same information in a video format as well for you, and these are just tools that we created to support your learning experience. We want you to take the summary of what we have explained to you with you, whatever you are working, if you're working from home or if you're working in the office with the participants. We just want you to have something to take with you. And with that, I will conclude this section and pass it back to Robin. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosani. We're going to now move into the question and answer portion. So if you have questions, you can enter them in chat, or you can unmute and introduce yourself, and Rosani and Michelle will be available to answer your questions. And I know that Nia has been monitoring the chat box to see if there are any questions, so she will cover those if that makes sense. So.
Yes, we have a question from Christy Freeman in the chat box. It's so for the ISY population, for example, low income plus an additional barrier is a requirement. If a youth does not meet any of the other barriers, but let's say indicates that they have a disability, their self-disclosure is sufficient, correct? For example, in order to determine BSD, self-disclosure is not sufficient. We have to administer a standardized test to determine deficiency. So to clarify, we are not required to have anything beyond self-disclosure for them to meet the barrier for disability.
Okay, if it's okay, Michelle, can I take this one?
Yes.
Okay, so self-disclosure is always okay to report the disability, but in the scenario that you are mentioning here, you want the disability to determine eligibility. And in that case, you do need additional documentation. And when you ask for that and gather that information, you need to keep that confidential. For reporting purposes, to say that you're working with a youth that has disabilities only for reporting status, right, in the system and in our legislation, self-attestation is enough. But if you're using that documentation to determine eligibility, and in this case, you are doing that because the youth has no other barrier, but you think that the youth has some disability, then you need to work out maybe with the school and get the IEP or some specific documentation that says that the student has a disability. And with that, you can use the disability as the barrier for eligibility. I hope that that clarifies it.
And we will include a list of today's questions and answers. If you think of questions that you want to send later to Rosanna and Michelle, we will be showing a slide that has their contact information, so please feel free to do that as well. Okay. Rosanna and Michelle, any final words you would like to share?
Thank you. And I look forward to meeting everyone when we're able to actually engage again, or we can meet on Zoom. Just do not delay if you have any questions, reach out.
Okay, so the slide that actually we'll back up. So this is just, there we go. I do want to go back to the slide that has their contact information so you can see their phone numbers and email addresses. Leave that up for just a minute, and we thank you again for participating in today's webinar, and we hope that you have a great day.
And we hope that this has been effective, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We are here for you. We're here to support you. That's why we are here. So we want you to feel comfortable coming and asking. There's no wrong question. We just want you to ask it. Thank you.